For the latest in strategic affairs, subscribe to our YouTube channel. Click the bell icon for updates.
Hello and welcome to StratNews Global. You're on our evening program, The Gist. I'm Nitin Gokhale. And with me this evening is our old friend and a familiar face on StratNews Global, Velina Tchakarova from Vienna all the way to New Delhi to attend the Raisina dialogue organized by the Ministry of External Affairs in India and the Observer Research Foundation, which concluded on Sunday. But she stayed on for a couple of days more because she is also guiding young diplomats and young scholars who are also invited by the Raisina dialogue to understand geopolitics and international relations. So welcome to this program, Velina, and thank you again for sparing some time to come here and speak to us.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the invitation. It's always a great pleasure being back, and that's my third time this year, so I very much hope that there will be more visits to India.
You're now becoming a frequent visitor to India, which is a good sign because that improves understanding between India and Europe and, of course, India and Austria. But let me turn our attention to Europe itself. 1 year after the Russian invasion in Ukraine, the war shows no sign of ending. And I've been reading your pieces, and you now, of course, an independent consultant and a strategic analyst. So first up, what are the three main drivers that you think constitutes Russian strategy as far as this war is concerned? Why has Russia continued to be engaged in this war?
Yes, of course, the main focus was always lying on the specifics of the warfare, obviously focused on Ukraine, but we need to understand that this war that was launched on the 24th of February was not only about Ukraine, but it was also about the European security order on the one hand, and also the better positioning in the newly emerging systemic conflict between China and the United States on the other hand. So what I mean by the European security order is that Russia has also launched, so to say, a non-kinetic war. That means war by other means against the European economic model, so to say, the democratic order of values, norms, and rules. You know that the European Union and the member states have been always propagating this very idea of the rules-based order. Now this is quite popular here in the Indo-Pacific with the free and open Indo-Pacific. So it's the same story, more or less, which is based on international law and on specifically agreed and accepted international norm standards of behavior. And practically, the idea here is that by waging this non-kinetic warfare, so let's say the enemy is not prepared, is not reacting adequately. We've seen this with very clever weaponization of commodities, and not only, of course, the energy commodities, but also the food commodities, the fertilizers, and then, of course, you have the full-fledged information warfare, nothing new, practically the same what we've been seeing in the Cold War. And then you have, of course, also the nuclear blackmail and also the threat of new migration pressure. Think of the migration, let's say, trump card as something that always puts a lot of political pressure on the decision makers because they have to run for elections. And once the migration card is...
Yes, of course. So, very good points there, which shows that the Russians had studied the European model and had found some loopholes or chinks in the armor in a way. That
Exactly.
So how united is Europe 1 year after the invasion began, the war began? Because obviously there are shortcomings in the European strategy. The unification of the thought in terms of how to take on Russia doesn't seem to get together, if I may say so. What is the strategy to be adopted? So how united is Europe, to be short?
This is a story with two faces, because on the one hand, we've seen actually an unprecedented level and scope of coherence in the European response and in the Western response when it comes to the sanctions. Russia has become the most sanctioned country by now. And in fact, at the core of this response has been the European Union with the member states. In fact, the first sanctions were introduced prior to the beginning of the war, when Russia recognized Luhansk and Donetsk. Now, when it comes to the other face, so the other side of the coin, here what I see as problematic is, in fact, not that they don't want to actually support Ukraine. In fact, they introduce something what is based on whatever it takes approach. It's a full-fledged, comprehensive, military, diplomatic, financial, political support for Ukraine. But what I see as problematic is actually the lack of strategic consensus about the ultimate goal that the West would support. Now, we've seen clarity from Ukraine. Ukraine has declared that the ultimate goal would be the restoration of the borders per 1991. These are the borders that Russia has also recognized after the collapse of the Soviet Union.
Right.
But if you go to the European capitals, if you go to the, to Brussels, you will find different replies as to what the ultimate goal is, what is actually the final objective. And here, I think that there are two, main issues. Mm-hmm. The one is that, are we going to see again, after 12 months, that Europe and the West will actually support Ukraine only so much as to sustain the military attack, the next military offensive?
Yes.
Or are we going to see an actually coherent and strong response that will enable Ukraine to push Russian troops away? So practically new successful military counteroffensive.
Sure. That seems to be still iffy. We still don't know which way it is going to go. But because if you look at the way the decision on the tanks was arrived at,
exactly. Think of the tanks issue, the military tanks issue, the long-range missiles, all of this. You see that it's not about the coherence of, when it comes to the conviction we need to deliver.
Right.
It's about the speed, it's about the scope, and it's about the ultimate goal. This is what I see as problematic.
The end objective is not clear as far as Europe is concerned. But also there is this feeling when you sit outside, like here we do in India, that there are camps within the European
bloc.
Union or the bloc or the Union. European Union or the European nations. There is the Anglo-Saxon bloc, UK and the
Anglosphere part,
Anglosphere, and then of course you have the France and Germany have different thoughts. So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, here the dividing line is quite obvious, it's quite overt. Let me just wrap it up very shortly for our audience. On the one hand, we have the classic, Anglosphere response. Here, right from the beginning, it was known and it was clear that the United States has zero intentions to get militarily involved in this conflict. But once we saw a full-fledged war, what happened was the change, the shift in the approach, the American approach, and of course the Brits were playing along, that they need to weaken Russia to the extent that Russia is practically is disabled in this bigger Dragon Bear alliance. Why? Because Washington obviously doesn't want to face a two-front scenario. That is the let's say the ultimate goal
for US.
For the US, from the Anglosphere. And here, Anglosphere, what I mean is, of course, that you still have, this situation in Europe with new and old Europe. Europe is obviously the part that has emerged out of the collapse of the Soviet Union. These countries still have, a higher demand for security guarantees. And of course, they go along with the United States, with the Anglosphere. The Brits have been providing a lot of security services. When it comes to the Franco-German bloc, this is, of course, the core of the European integration project. It does not mean only enlargement. It means also political integration. The European Union wanted to become strategically autonomous. It wanted to achieve strategic sovereignty before this war began. For me, the question of strategic autonomy died on the 24th February. Then it was also about, becoming a defense union, becoming a monetary union.
Yes.
So all of these projects are actually pushed by France and Germany. And at the very same time, we know these are the same countries that have been engaging in a geopolitical rapprochement with Moscow prior to the war for other, calculus. The calculus was, if we are to face, rising China, we need a better positioning, and we will only achieve this by having better relationship with Russia. This was the main rationale. So, of course, once the war began, these countries were actually trying to diplomatically reach out to Moscow to have phone calls and so on and so forth. And these are also the countries that are actually pushing the narrative. No, dissolution of the Russian Federation. Russia should not be humiliated. Russia should be offered an exit plan, and all of this. Right. So you see that we are dealing
trying to balance
completely different perceptions, completely different approaches. And here my main question is, and this is what I actually have no answer to, is whether we will not see, if let's schematically assume that this kind of bifurcation will continue. Right. That means bigger,
the divide between
deeper decoupling between, China and United States, Russia in between, and if Russia emerges successful out of the war, what does it mean for Europe? I think that this kind of dividing line will only get strengthened, and this kind of bifurcation will affect also the old continent, where we will see, decision as to whether to go with the one or with the other, which will be devastating for the West.
If you force nations to make choices, then there are issues there. That's absolutely true. And all the old assumptions of European unity are under test, under stress.
Put to test.
Right now.
Absolutely, I agree with you.
These people. So also this war has brought out that the security guarantees or the security of Europe still depends largely on United States.
Exclusively on United States as the security umbrella of NATO.
Yes.
So as I said, the whole question about strategic sovereignty in the field of security and defense is actually has been outdated, in a sense that right now what matters is how to strengthen the European pillar within NATO. What kind of security guarantees will be offered to Ukraine? Will it be within NATO? Will it be nukes for NATO, for Ukraine? Sorry. Which territories? I mean, there are so many questions that are now actually not resolved, and that create also kind of dichotomy within the European bloc. But these are potential. Let's be clear about it. These are potential dividing lines. I'm just pointing to some possible trends. That does not mean that right now in this moment, everyone is convinced. We have to do, all we have to do is to support, and this is what's happening. And as I said, I only question the scope and the speed with which this military aid is now being provided to Ukraine.
But what is the future? I mean, let's look at it like this. I mean, China is now trying to also send signals that it might supply Russia with arms. So if that happens, then it complicates matters for everyone, including India. Forget United States, but including India. And therefore, we have to wait and watch what happens. What is your sense? You spent about 4-5 days now in India. Is India in a position to mediate? Is India in a position to bring the two warring parties together? Any sense you gathered on that?
Well, it's hard to tell because, like I said, mediation and negotiations will follow actually military facts on the ground.
Right.
We need to see who is going to emerge victorious out of this phase, first and foremost, because if you listen to both parties, both are right now convinced that they can actually make a difference on the front lines.
Okay.
Both are convinced that they can actually decide this war
in the next few months.
In the next few months, because the window of opportunity will be closing not late than November. In November, United States begins the election season.
Yes.
But also Russia is going to start preparing for presidential election campaign that is set for the 17th of March. So obviously the Russian president is also going to start pushing for at least some sort of ceasefire, some sort of break, because he wants to present the audience at home with something. He needs a military victory, at least let's say a partial one. So going back to your question, right now I think it's impossible to imagine
For anyone to meet.
how mediation and negotiations will precede the military developments
Situation,
and the
yes.
military situation. But let's assume now that we are already in the situation where the military developments are actually taking place. Here, I think that it will be something of a hybrid form of mediation, because it must fit somehow both, the interests of both sides.
Yes.
So probably, most likely, it will be something at the top of the, of the global system, something where United States with China, maybe India could provide some kind of format within the G20, at least for a meeting,
Correct.
as it was happening right now, just a few days ago.
Yes.
Even Lavrov and
Lavrov
Blinken came together. But this I think is the role for India, at least in this year. I mean, in this,
G20 presidency. Yes.
there are more than 200, I think, events altogether
Exactly.
planned for the G20 format. So I think that this is a format which is realistic one, but in the end it will be, a US-China kind of format, the two systemic rivals. And why is it so important what you mentioned with the military assistance? Because, let's be clear, if China decides to provide military assistance for Russia, and it will not do it out of altruism, it will do it out of the strategic necessity that it cannot face three fronts scenario by any means.
Sure.
Given the growing military tensions with India and given the growing military escalation with Taiwan and the neighbors in South China Sea.
Yes.
By no chance China would actually allow security vacuum in the north. So what does it mean? It means that if that happens, we have to deal with the proxy war in the classic term of proxy war, and that would mean that, as I've been arguing since since day one, that we see how Russia's war against Ukraine is the manifestation of Cold War 2.0.
True. And your term, very apt term, I must say. Let me end my interaction with you on this note. Dragon Bear. You are the one who sort of can be credited of having coined this term. That equation may turn out to be something that we don't know which way it is going. I think even the United States is trying to figure out what are the two seeming good friends, partnership of no limits, China and Russia, are going to do going forward. That also poses problems for countries like India.
Absolutely, yes. Big challenge.
Yeah, big challenge. So, do you think, do you see the Chinese playing a role in trying to lower the temperatures, lower the tempers, and try and play a role? If not, India is not in a position, despite its G20 presidency. Do you think China, and you answered that partly in your last statement, that we might see Cold War 2.0, but is China ready to face that Cold War? I mean, that's the question.
I think that if we take a look at the geoeconomic side of the equation, China has peaked demographically.
Right.
China will probably not be able to generate this economic growth anymore in the future. It is now or never. It is now or never. So practically what we are going to observe is more assertive, more nationalistically oriented China, at least in the next 10, 15 years. That means in the period where these significant objective systemic processes will kick in.
Right.
So this is the moment for China to actually be assertive. Of course, China was playing for time and was hoping that with the Biden administration there will be a kind of a break and a kind of a normalization. But this, I think, window of opportunity is gone. And at the same time, I simply do not expect that China has any serious intention to mediate. I mean, this kind of 12 points, peace plan proposal, or all of this kind of, let's say, deception, which is normal for big powers, to present themselves as constructive players. This is only meant for the case that, let's say, serious black swan happens. Like, for instance, there is a kind of interplay of variables that we don't even know.
Sure.
And this leads to kind of awkward, unexpected situation.
True.
But in the end, Russia is pushed in the corner, and then China, of course, will have to act as this responsible international player.
Yes.
This is why it's meant. I mean, China, I'm sure, has no expectations, realistic expectations that Russia would actually get along with 12 points plan.
Yeah.
Also, if you think Ukraine has already proposed 10 points plan that was agreed by so many,
Other countries.
other countries. So it could have actually propagated the already existent plan. So the very fact that it comes with, a new plan that tries to reflect on the Russian interests, and you see some of the points are absolutely out of context. So whatsoever, speaking
Outrageous.
of outrageous, yes, and Cold War. So all in all, I think that in the end, it's going to be a kind of, unfortunately, signs of the time, kind of U.S.-China agreement where, they will be talking to both. Then there will be a second-tier mediators, Turkey. I mean, obviously, as I said, India is going to play a role.
Right.
The thing is to understand that this war, as I've been saying, is not only taking place in the military dimension. So there are plenty of other roles for, let's say, the commodities part, economy, trade, the humanitarian catastrophe emerging out of this, energy and so on. So every significant regional player will be finding a kind of a role within this complex process. But at the top of it will be in the
What happens on the ground?
yes, military outcome, then mediation, probably ceasefire, depending on
Exactly. I think very well put, Velina. Couldn't have put it better. I mean, we are wiser. We know what exactly is happening on the ground there through you and through your writings, of course, and your frequent appearances on StratNews Global. So thank you once again for being here and sparing time to talk to us.
Thank you very much. It's been big pleasure.
Pleasure. Thank you. So viewers, that was Velina Tchakarova, all the way from Vienna, was in India, is in India right now, but is about to go back. So you heard her, what's happening in Europe. Let's keep fingers crossed that the conflict doesn't get out of hand. Right now, it's anybody's guess which way it is going. So do keep sending your feedbacks. You do send us your comments. And of course, we will come to you with more such programs. You know where to follow us. We will expect more comments and feedback from you going forward. Thanks for watching.